Hi everyone, welcome back to today's lesson, which is part 2 of the article series. We did part 1 last week. This is the second part and the final part of that series. And last week we looked at the basics. If you haven't seen that video yet and you're not too confident with articles, I would recommend that you check that out. I will put a link in the description box, and hopefully I'll be able to put an info card up here as well for you to have a look at that. And this lesson just goes into articles in a little bit more detail. It's a little bit more advanced and a bit more complicated because it looks at all the rules and the exceptions to those rules as well. Maybe when you think, oh, I should use an article, it's singular, it's countable, and maybe not. So we'll look at some of those exceptions to the regular rules as well in this video lesson. If you have any questions, doubts, or requests, please leave them in the description box below. And without further ado, let's get straight to the lesson. So I think the first place to start most logically is with the indefinite article. It also has the least number of rules that go with it, which is quite nice too. So we use the indefinite article, which remember is at or an, depending on the pronunciation of the word after the article. Remember, if the next word begins with a vowel sound, not necessarily a vowel in terms of writing, but a vowel sound, then we use an. If it begins with a consonant sound, then we use a. But anyway, when we mention something for the first time or one unspecific thing, we use a or an. There is a great restaurant on Newton Street, so it sounds like it's the first time that I'm mentioning it, right? So I'm going to use a. We also use a and an with jobs. And maybe in your first language you don't, but in English you always need to use the indefinite article when you are talking about jobs. My sister is an architect. My mother was a teacher. He works as a vet. Yeah, in all of those cases I'm using a or an. And this note is important to mention. You must remember that singular countable nouns should not be used alone, with a few little special exceptions. Of course, there are always exceptions, and we'll look at those later. But they must always be used with a determiner, and articles are a type of determiner. Remember, other types can include things like possessives or quantifiers or numbers. Okay, but basically they shouldn't be used alone. Now let's turn to the next slide, and as you can see, there are a lot more rules in terms of how you should use the definite article the. So the first point is when we know which thing someone is talking about, and we touched on this last week when we were doing the first lesson on articles. So if we already know, for whatever reason really, if we already know the thing that somebody is talking about, maybe we talked about it last week or it's just been mentioned, now we can start to use the. The restaurant you told me about was amazing. Yeah, this is a specific restaurant, the restaurant that you already told me about. Okay. With superlatives, so this is things like biggest, smallest, highest, the most beautiful, the most interesting. All of those superlatives, we always use the. That is the biggest ship I have ever seen. The next one is when there is only one of something. The Earth is the third closest planet to the Sun. So as you can see here in our solar system, there's only one Earth and there's only one Sun. So we use the when we talk about them, because we all know the Earth and we all know what we're talking about when we say the Sun. So we use the. We also use the with seas, oceans, rivers, mountain ranges, but not single mountains, and deserts. So the Pacific Ocean covers more than 1/3 of the Earth's surface. Okay, we've chosen the Pacific Ocean, but it doesn't matter which ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea. Yeah, we always use the. We also use the to refer to groups of people, the young, the elderly, the rich, the unemployed, and also some national groups. The injured were rescued after the devastating earthquake. And I will just go back to that point about what I was saying about national groups, because there is a little bit of a rule in terms of how you can use the when you're talking about national groups. So basically, we use the with some nationality adjective to talk about people from a particular country. And you generally use this when the nationality adjective ends in sh, like the British, ch, like the French, ese, like the Japanese, or double s For example, like the Swiss. Now, when you have people from other nationalities where the adjective doesn't end in those suffixes, then you're going to use the plural form. So the Americans, the Italians, the Germans, etc. So there's a little bit of a rule to guide you about when you can use the with national groups. You should also use the when talking about countries that are in the plural. So with plural countries or countries with republic, like the Dominican Republic, Kingdom, the United Kingdom, or states like the United States of America. So the Dutch, remember there that ends in CH, so we can use the with the national group Dutch. The Dutch live in the Netherlands. Okay, that's a plural country, so we use the. We also use the with musical instruments. She plays the piano beautifully. And we usually use the with organisations, newspapers, theatres, and cinemas. There are a couple of exceptions, but this is a good general rule. The UK, the United Kingdom, voted to leave the European Union in 2016. So the European Union is an organisation, and therefore it takes the. The one significant exception that stands out to me is NATO, and we don't use an article with NATO. But in general, the other ones we do. And then usually when a place name contains of, this is a great clue actually, and it's one that I give to my students. If you're going to use of in the name, it probably needs the. So the University of Sheffield is a research university. Other examples include things like the Statue of Liberty and the Tower of London. Let's now take a look at the rules surrounding when you should use the zero article or no article, okay? So you use it when you're talking in general about plural countable nouns or uncountable nouns. This was in the lesson last week, so this should be quite clear for you. I love dogs. So if you are talking in a general sense, you don't need to use an article when you are using a plural countable noun or an uncountable noun. Okay, the next point is with sports. Okay, maybe you use an article in your first language, but in English, no article with sports. She plays hockey every Tuesday and Thursday. We also do not use an article when we are talking about single mountains and lakes. So you remember in the previous slide, we used the with mountain ranges like the Rocky Mountains, but with single mountains like Mount Everest, we don't. That's confusing, isn't it? And also with single lakes too. So Lake Como is in Italy. And then when talking about most countries, we looked at the exceptions actually on the previous slide. Most countries, regions and cities, they do not take an article. So she grew up in Cornwall. Cornwall is a region in the UK and it doesn't take an article. Most do not. Also, no article with the names of streets, squares, parks and plazas. So Hyde Park is a large park in central London. Okay, so Hyde Park, no article. Also central London there has no article. Then we usually use zero article with buildings that begin with the name of a place or a person. Windsor Castle suffered a major fire in 1992. And in fact, you could actually compare that with the previous slide where we looked at things with of the University of Sheffield. However, if we change that around, we would just say Sheffield University. We wouldn't say the Sheffield University because Sheffield is a place, it's a city in the UK, so we wouldn't use the in that case. So if it has of, we're going to use the University of Sheffield. But if the building begins with the name of the city or a person, that's also possible. You generally do not need an article as well because the name of the person or the place actually determines the building. And the final one is companies. Usually you don't use the with companies unless the is part of the company name. Sometimes that's possible as well. I actually watched a film the other day and I saw that Facebook was called The Facebook before they changed the name and they dropped the article. I thought that was quite interesting. So in the example here, we can see that Apple is used without an article. It's a company name. So it says, I wonder when Apple will launch a new iPhone. And I have one last special slide for you here, because this is the point which I think causes the most confusion for people. And that's when you don't use any article, but you probably would expect that you would, if that makes sense. So you would expect in these cases to use an article, but actually you don't. And we're going to look at these special exceptions of when you use zero article. So generally you don't use any article with meals. What time do you eat lunch? Or do you usually eat breakfast before you leave for work or school? But that said, we do use an article when we use an adjective before the meal name. I had an amazing breakfast this morning. Or when we are talking about a specific meal, for example, the dinner you made last night was delicious. I'm talking about a specific dinner, not I make dinner every night. We're talking about the dinner that you made last night. Okay, so there's actually an exception to the exception. Of course, that's confusing, isn't it? Also, we use zero article or no article when a noun is followed by a number. Remember, a number is actually a type of determiner, so it helps us to determine which thing we are talking about. So the meeting will be held in conference room 4, or your train leaves from platform 6, etc. And also, this is perhaps the most confusing point, the one that people get mixed up with the most, because we don't use an article with certain institutions. For example, school, university, prison, hospital, and church. And we don't use an article when it's used for their specific purpose. So, for example, learning, worship, or treatment, etc. Right? So, we would say he went to prison for tax fraud. And if you compare that with he went to the prison to visit his brother. So in the first sentence, the person goes to prison to serve their time as the punishment for the crime that they committed. They go there for the purpose of the prison, which is a form of punishment and also for rehabilitation as well, to go back into society depending on the crime committed. And in the second sentence, the brother isn't a prisoner, so we can't say he went to prison. We have to say he went to the prison. We know which prison. It's the prison where his brother is. And as he's going as a visitor, not for the purpose of the prison, we use the. And the same applies for something like hospital. Yeah, she went to hospital after the accident. Her family went to the hospital to visit her. So we use an article when we're talking about a particular institution. You can use at or the. So there is a school on Main Street, or they went to the school to pick up a prospectus. In that case, you know which school they went to because it was the school that they were interested in, which is why they went there to pick up a prospectus to find out more information. Okay, that is the last point. I know the topic of articles is quite overwhelming at times, and that is okay. It's not a problem. You can come back and review as often as you need to review these rules. That's absolutely fine. But in the meantime, I have prepared a little quiz to check how much you have remembered in terms of these rules and exceptions, etc. So let's take a look. It's similar to the previous lesson on articles. It's error recognition and correction if needed. So let's look at each sentence, decide if it's correct, and if it's incorrect, let's correct it together. So the first one here is, she is teacher. This one is incorrect because we must always use an article when we are talking about a profession. We use the indefinite article. She is a teacher. Should we eat lunch at 1 p.m.? This is correct because with meals, we usually do not use an article. So this one is absolutely correct. The Mount Everest is incredible. Incorrect because with single mountains, we don't use an article. Mount Everest is incredible. Remember, with mountain ranges, you do use an article, but single mountains, no article. Please turn to the page 65. This one is incorrect because remember, when a noun is followed by a number, we don't use an article. So it should be, please turn to page 65. And the last one here is United States has a population of about 330 million people. This one is incorrect because although we don't usually use an article with countries, we do with countries that contain something like states or kingdom or republic. So it should be the United States, or you can use the full form, the United States of America has a population of about 330 million people. So that's it for part 2 of the articles review. So with articles, I don't want you to feel bad if it all seems very overwhelming with all of this information. Rest assured that even the most advanced students need to review articles relatively regularly. It's one of those topics that I find that I'm asked to review. Oh, I've forgotten the rules, etc. So don't worry about that. If you feel like you need to come back and watch this again in a couple of months, absolutely fine. No problem with that. But that's it on articles. If you have any questions or requests or doubts, please leave them in the comments section below, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye for now.